Morning, Mom and Dad.
Good morning, Mom and Dad.
Bob and Anna, how are you?
We're good. How are you folks?
We're doing fine. We are doing
Good.
fine. It's a pretty day here. Is the sun out by
Yes,
you?
it's beautiful.
Good to hear. Good to hear.
How pretty.
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good Shabbos, Sharon.
Shabbos, good morning.
Good to see you.
We can see you too.
Everyone, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
And I have to tell you, it's very funny to hear your voice and look at Wheeler at the same time. There, I'd rather look at your face, but he's good to look at too. You're muted.
Muted.
Oh, I have to change the name.
Shabbat Shalom.
Mike.
Shabbat Shalom, Judy.
Shabbat Shalom, Mike.
Yeah, Sharon and Bob and Anna and Alex.
Mike.
Alex is here. He's eating flex this morning.
What'd you say, Anna?
He's eating lax.
He's eating lox. That's how you know
Oh,
he's a
yeah.
good Jewish boy chick.
Ruby Day.
Gotta keep the spirit of tradition alive.
You can always find lax in the freezer here.
I'm coming over.
Yeah, me too.
I will tell you a story that Saul Katz told me when we were visiting him and when he was in his last illness. He told Ann and me about this, and he was talking about Karina Pupko, I believe it was. Well, anyway, in the synagogue, they stored all this lox in the freezer, and they have expiration dates. So somebody had pulled out, whoever was doing the kiddush, the lox for that Shabbat, and it was on the counter thawing. And Karina came in and saw it. And she said, "Oh, expired." And she threw it out, and it created this huge brouhaha about when you lox in the freezer.
We're well versed because we kept the show stocked in luck. To us that she out because it was outdated. But according to the Lux company, you can be frozen for a year after the expiration date. So we would buy it when it went on sale.
Yeah.
She would,
Oh, Anna was probably the kiddush, charge of all the kiddush at that time. Because I remember when I first joined the shul, Anna was the kiddush person.
Anna and Bob did the kiddush for years
too,
and
yeah.
years and years. They did.
okay.
Anita did a lot of work
And
too.
Anita helped, right? Hello, Kristen. It's good to see you. Joel and Bonnie and everybody.
Gene, how's your leg doing?
Coming along.
We would.
Can you see what he?
If we didn't have ice all over the streets,
She's feeding the
we'd
dog
be out
lunch.
walking together, right? But we have ice all over the streets right now. Badly timed storm.
There's more tomorrow, I think.
And more after
Yeah.
that too, I think.
Yeah,
It's
every other
February
day.
in New England.
We got very
Rebecca,
spoiled
Shabbat
by last
Shalom.
year.
Sit down. He wants to lax.
Rebecca, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Good to be here. Can't get in there.
Shabbat shalom, Rebecca. Good to see you again.
Hello, hello.
Before
see
there
you.
was,
Yeah.
I can't get up there.
Yes.
We'll give it about 2 more minutes and then we'll get going.
Welcome.
Shabbos, Kristen. That was a beautiful family picture of yours.
What was that picture? Could you show it again? I sort of saw it, but
Yeah, sure. I just let's see. Let me turn off my video.
I didn't know what I was looking at.
Yeah, it's a old family picture I got from a distant cousin of mine who I met over Facebook, and the man is my great grandfather.
Wow.
And those are his sisters.
That's
So,
really classic.
Isn't that fun?
Yes.
We don't have any pictures like that elsewhere in the family, so I like that one.
I have nothing like that.
Yeah.
Going back no generations.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So I'm glad some of the previous people had a little style, but
Where did they live?
they were out in north of Spokane in eastern Washington. So not a style center, but
Oh, they had a good photographer there.
they did.
Yeah.
They did.
Wow, that's
It
beautiful.
probably, I'm guessing it probably was done in Spokane because there's nothing out there. Even today, very small little places.
Maybe that was the big trip into the city or something.
Yeah, I wonder if he was like getting engaged or something and they went along for an extra photo. Who knows? I'll have to ask the cousin, see if he has any thoughts.
Wonderful.
Still family out there?
Yeah, a ton.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm a fish out of water here on the East Coast.
Hmm.
There's no one out here. Everyone went out west, and I'm from there, so
See it, 'cause
Native connection at all?
native to
Native American?
no, unfortunately, no. I did. A cousin of mine though has it on his the side we aren't related on. That's fascinating to. I've done a lot of genealogy for him. Really, Northern Cheyenne in Wyoming.
Oh,
Yeah. And the US government was so insane that, they kept crazy records about. So the upside is good records, I guess. So anyway, enough about me.
That was a great little family history interlude to bring us all together this morning. Thank you, Kristen. And Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Really nice to see you all. And Sharon, you kind of bemoaned how icy it is out, but actually, since this is the first time in a week we've seen the sun, the ice might be the only thing that's keeping people in services this morning instead of out walking. So, hopefully we'll get a little melt over the course of the day, but it does feel like the first time we've seen sun in a while. Sorry, Sharon, I muted everyone. Feel free
Sorry,
to-
by noon it could be all gone, I'm saying.
There we go. Not all the snow, but hopefully at least enough of the ice to go for a nice afternoon walk. So you get the full balance today. So this morning we're going to be reading Parshat Yitro, which is most famous for, of course, the 10 Commandments and the Revelation. And I was trying to get in the mindset of things this week, and I was trying to do that by finding, the reading or the poem with which I was going to get started this morning. And I kind of expected that would be an easy task. I thought there would be something great about mountains or about Sinai or about 10 Commandments, and I did not find that, which made it a more interesting and more intentional task than I thought it was going to be. But I did come up with a pretty short poem by Langston Hughes that I think really contextualizes in a lot of ways kind of some of the transitions and relationship building that's happening today at Sinai, right? Some of kind of the people going up and God coming down at the same time, and how much things change really after today, which is, or the historical, today of the Parsha, maybe not February 6th. And so I wanted to start with this Langston Hughes poem. It's called God. I am God without one friend, alone in my purity, world without end. Below me, young lovers tread the sweet ground, but I am God, I cannot come down. Spring, life is love is life only, better to be human than God and lonely. And so as we move towards this point of connection and maybe this kind of meeting in the middle or meeting at the top of the mountain, and thinking about kind of how that relationship continues to develop, I hope those words will carry us through this morning's Torah reading. And with that, we will get going. Max Kirstein, if you want to put your video on and unmute yourself, Shabbat Shalom, and I will put the Siddur up on the page and cue you for Matovu on page 61.
Matovu, Ochalecha Yaakov, Mishkanotecha Yisrael. Matovu, Ochalecha Yaakov, Mishkanotecha Yisrael.
And we will continue on page 65 with Birchot HaShachar. If you would like, please rise.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lasech vina lechavin ben yom uvelayla. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani b'tzalmo. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani ben chorin. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam pokeach ivrim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam malbish arumim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam matir asumim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam zokei haaretz, zokei kefufim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam rokach haaretz ol chamayim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asali kol tzorki. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam chamechin mitzeh de gaver. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam oter haaretz Yisrael bigvura. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam oter Yisrael b'tifara. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hanoten leach koach. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamevir shenai me'anai unumach me'afapai.
Amen. Praise you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, removing sleep from my eyes and slumber from my eyelids. And we will continue with the concluding paragraph of the Psalm for Shabbat on page 72, which I put up the wrong 72, sorry. Tzadika Tamar.
Tzadika Tamar Yifra Ka'erez Balvanon Yiske Shetulim Beved Adonai Betzarot Eloheinu Yafrichu O Yenuvun Beseva Deshenim Rananim Yehu Lehagid Ki Asher Adonai Zori Velo Avla Tabo.
And we'll continue with our first Mourner's Kaddish of the day. And for anyone who would like to join in the Mourner's Kaddish or participate responsively, you can go ahead and unmute yourself now. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Be'alma divrach yirtei, be'amlich malchutei, be'chayechon, v'yomechon, u'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael, v'agala v'zman kariv v'imru Amen. Barach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei d'kudusha
Brichu.
Ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbachata v'nechemata tamiran be'alma v'yimru Amen.
Amen.
Ehei shlomaraba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen.
Amen.
Shalom mimromav hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru Amen.
Amen.
And I'll put us all back on mute. And Max, if you want to unmute yourself one more time, we will continue at the top of page 83 with Baruch Shamar.
Baruch Shema Behaya Halam Baruch Baruch Hu Baruch Osa V'Reshit Baruch Omer V'Osa Baruch Gozer Kayem Baruch Mirachem Al Haaretz Baruch Mirachem Al Habriot Baruch Meshalem Shekartov Lireab Baruch Halead Vekam Lanesach Baruch Boda Umatzio Baruch Shemo.
Praised are you, Adonai our God, ruler of the universe, compassionate creator, extolled by your people, glorified by your faithful servants. We laud you with the psalms of your servant David. We extol you in song. We celebrate your fame and melody. We proclaim you sovereign, singular, eternal God. Praised are you, Adonai, sovereign, magnified with songs of praise. And anyone who is standing may be seated. We will continue with Ashrei, and I don't know if we can get a couple volunteers for the responsive Ashrei. First two hands I see, take it, or at least one. There's Mike and Sharon. Awesome. I didn't see anyone else, Sharon, unless you want to say, oh, Janny.
It's okay.
I will do it if nobody else wants to. If someone else wants to, please go, because I've got other stuff going on today too. Janny, do you want to do it with Mike?
I'll do the second part. Yes, very much. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Mike, unmute yourself before you get going.
There we go.
Okay.
Ashrei Yoshvei Veiteko Od Yaluko Selam.
Ashrei Ha'am Shekakalo, Ashrei Ha'am Shadanoy Elohav.
Tila David, Aromimcha Elohai Hamelech, Lavracha Shimcha Leolam Vaed.
B'chol Yom Avachecha, V'chalal Shemcha Le'olam Va'ed.
Gadol Adonai Humalo Meod, V'ligdulato Ein Heker.
Doledo Yeshabat Ma'asecha, Uverotecha Yagidu.
Hadar Kavod Hodecha, V'divrei Niflotecha Asicha.
Ve'znuz Narosecha Yomeru, Udolosecha Asaprena.
Zecher Rav Tucho Yabiu, V'tzidkocha Yiranenu.
Chanun Barachun Adonai, Erech Apayim Molda Chesed.
Tov Adonai Lakol, Barak Amov Kol Ma'asav.
Yadu Adonai Kol Ma'asecha, V'chasidecha Yivachucha.
Kavod Malkuta Yomeru, Ugvuratcha Yidaberu.
V'chodia Livnei Hadam Gerota, V'chavod Hadam Malchuto.
Malkutecha Malkut Kol Olamim, Umemshaltecha B'Kol Dor V'Dor.
So Mech Adonai L'chal HaNoflim, V'zokef L'chal HaKfufim.
Einei Cho Elecho Yisaberu, V'atonoten Lohem Et Oklam Bito.
Potea et Yadecha, Umaspia L'chai Chai Ratzon.
Tzadik Adonai b'chol dorochav, v'chasid b'chol masav.
Kara v'ranor l'chal kara, v'chol asher yikra'uhu be'emet.
Ritzon Yureov Yaseh, V'yeshavatam Nishma V'yoshiem.
Shomer Adonai ekal ha'ahava, v'ekal ha'shayim yashmid.
Tilo Adonai Yadaber Pi, V'vorei kol b'so Shem Kodsho Le'olam Vo'ed.
V'anachnu nevarech Yah, me'ata v'ad olam, hallelujah.
Yasher Koach, thank you both so much. We're going to get a lot of different voices incorporated in this morning's services, which is really nice. We will continue with Psalm 150, which is on page 100. Please join me from home. Hallelujah, 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 El Bekodsho, hallelujah, hallelujah, Birki Auzo, hallelujah, 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 Bigurotav, hallelujah, hallelujah, Kerov Gulo, hallelujah, 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 Beteka Shofar, hallelujah, hallelujah, Benevel Bechinor, hallelujah, 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 Betof Umachol, hallelujah, hallelujah, Beninim Ve'ugav, hallelujah, 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 Betil Tzele Shama, hallelujah, hallelujah, Betil Tzele Trua, Kol Hanshama Tehalelia, Tehalelia, hallelujah, Kol Hanshama Tehalelia, hallelujah, Kol Hanshama Tehalelia, hallelujah. And we'll turn to the top of page 102, and if you would like, please rise for the beginning of Az Yashir. Az Yashir Moshe Uvenei Yisrael et Hashira Hazot Ladonai Vayomru Lehemor Ashira Ladonai Ki Gao Gaha Sus Verochvo Rama Vayam Ozi bezimratya vayili lishua ze'eli ve'anvehu Elohei aviv aromemenhu. And we'll turn the page and continue in the middle of the concluding paragraph. Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed. Adonai imloch le'olam va'ed. Ki l'Adonai mulcha Moshe v'goyim, v'alu Moshim parton l'shvot ha'esav, v'yital Adonai hamlucha, v'haya Adonai l'melech al kol haaretz, v'yom avi Adonai echad, u'shemo echad. And if you're standing, you may take a minute to sit before we get to Yishtabach as we continue in the middle of page 105. Ha'el betatzumot uzecha, ha'gadol bichlod shemecha, ha'gibor lanetzach, fano rabi noratecha, ha'melech ha'yoshev, ha'kisei ram v'nisa, shochein ad marom, v'kadosh shemaho, v'chatu bronim tzadikim b'Adonai, וישרים נבטילה, בפי שרים תתהלל, ובדברי צדיקים תתברך, ובלשון חסדים תתרומם, ובקרב קדושים תתקדש, ובמקהלות רבבות, עמך בית ישראל, ברינת פרשמך מלכים בכל דור ודור, שכן כל בת קודשים לפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, להודות להלל, שבח לפאר, לרומם, להדר, לברך, להלל ולקלס, על כל דברי שירו ותשבחות, דוד בן ישי, עבדך משיחך. And we rise on the top of 106. ישתבח שמך לעד מלכנו, היי למלך הגדול והקדוש בשמיים וארץ, כי לך נא אדוני אלוהינו ואבותינו, שיר ושבחה, הלל וזמרה, עוז ממשלה נצח גדולה גבורה, תהילה תפארת, קדושה ומלכות.
ברכות והודאות מעתה ועד עולם. ברוך אתה אדוני אל מלך גדול בתשבחות, אל ההודאות אדון הנפלאות, הבוחר בשרי זמרך מלך אל העולמים.
Amen. And we continue with Yishtabach, with Chatzi Kaddish and Baruch. If you would like to unmute, please do so. Yitgadal v'yitgadash Shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
V'amlich malchutei v'chayechon v'machon v'chayet v'chol beit Yisrael v'agalav v'zman kariv v'imru
Amen.
Yehei Shmei Rabbo Mevorach, Olam Omei Omayam.
You may be seated. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, yotzer v'orech choshech, oseh shalom, v'orei et hakol. Praise are you, Adonai our God, ruler of the universe, creating light and fashioning darkness, ordaining the order of all creation. And we'll continue at the bottom of the page with Ein Kirkacha, which will lead us into Elad. Ein Kirkacha Adonai Eloheinu b'olam hazeh, v'ein tzlatcha malkeinu l'chayei ha'olam haba. Efes v'iltecha golinu mot ha'mashiach, v'enu melech ha'moshienu l'tchiyat ha'metim. El Adon al kol hamasim baruch umvorach befi kol neshama gadlo v'tuvo malei olam da'at utfuna sovevi moto hamitka'el chayot hakodesh nehedar v'chavo l'cha merkava zechut umishor lifnei chiso chesed rachamim lifnei kevodo Tovim me'orot shebara Eloheinu yitzaram beda'at bevina ufaskel koach ugvura natan bahem liot moshlim bekerev tevel meleim ziv umfikim nogana ezivam bechol ha'olam Semechim b'tzeitam mesasim bevoam osim b'eim aretzon konam pe'er v'chavod notnim lishmot tzavla verina lezecher malchuto kara lashemesh v'yizrach or ra'a v'hitkin tzurat halvana shevach notnim lo Kol tzeva marom tiferet ugedula srafim ve'ofanim lechayot hakodesh nai 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 Yai, nai, 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 nai. And we will flip a couple pages and continue at the bottom of 110 with Or Chadash. Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir, Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir, Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir, Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir. V'nizke kulanu meheira leoro. V'nizke kulanu meheira leoro. Baruch atah Adonai yotzer hameorot. And on the top of page 111, let's read together in the English. Deep is your love for us, Adonai our God, boundless your tender compassion. Avinu Malkeinu, you taught our ancestors life-giving laws. They trusted in you. For their sake, graciously teach us. Our Maker, merciful provider, show us mercy, grant us discernment and understanding. Then will we study your Torah, heed its words, teach its precepts, and follow its instruction, lovingly fulfilling all its teachings. Open our eyes to your Torah, help our hearts cleave to your mitzvot, unite all our thoughts to love and revere you. Then we will never be brought to shame, for we trust in your awesome holiness and will delight in your deliverance. Bring us safely from the four corners of the earth and lead us in dignity to our holy land. For you are the source of deliverance. You have called us from all peoples and tongues, constantly drawing us nearer to you, that we may lovingly offer you praise, proclaiming your oneness. Praised are you, Adonai, who loves the people Israel. Baruch atah Adonai, habocher b'amo Yisrael b'ahava. And on page 112, anyone who would like to unmute and join me in the Shema of Yahavta, please do so.
Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Kol nafshecho v'kol yodecho, for you advarim ha'eleh mitzvah yom alevonecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibartam v'veitecha lechtecha b'derech u'shaklecha shartam liot al yodecha al yirotofot beinenecha u'tam al mezuzot beitecha v'sharecha.
אם שמוע תשמעו מצוותיי אשר אנוכי מצווה אתכם היום לאהבה את אדוני אלוהיכם ולעבדו בכל לבבכם ובכל נפשכם ונתתי את ארצכם בתורה מקוש ואספת דגנך ותירשך ויצרך ונתתי עשב בשדך לבנתך ואכלת ושבעת הישמרו לכם פן יפתה לבבכם וסרתם ועבדתם אלוהים אחרים השתחוויתם להם וחרף אדוני בכם ועצר את השמיים לא יהיה מטר והאדמה לא תיתן את יבולה ועבדתם מהרה מעל הארץ הטובה אשר אדוני נותן לכם ושמתם את דבריי אלה על לבבכם ועל נפשכם וקשרתם אותם לאות על ידכם והיו תותפות בין עיניכם ולימדתם אותם את בניכם לברבם בשיטתך וביתך ולכתך בדרך ושכבך ובקומך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך וישערך למען ירבו מכם ובניכם על האדמה אשר נשבע אדוני לאבותיכם לתת להם כימי השמיים על הארץ, ויאמר אדוני אל משה לאמור, דבר אל בני ישראל ואמרת עליהם ועשו להם ציצית על כנפי בגדיהם לדורותם, ונתנו על ציצית הכנף כתל תכלת, והיה לכם לציצית, וראיתם אותו, זכרתם את כל מצוות אדוני ועשיתם אותם, ולא תטורו אחרי לבבכם ואחרי עיניכם, אשר אתם זונים אחריהם, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם אמת, אדוני אלוהיכם אמת. And we'll turn the page to page 114, and in just a moment we'll continue with Tilo Elyon in the middle of the page, followed by Micha Mocha. After that, we'll start the Amidah all together. I'll unmute whoever would like to participate in the Kaddish with me, in the Kedusha with me, sorry, and then we will take a couple minutes for silent prayer and meditation. But first, we are right in the middle of page 114. Tehillah Elyon Baruch Borach Moshe Miriam Bnei Israel Lachanu Shira B'Simcha Rabba Ve'amru Chulam
Mi chamocha be'elim Adonai, mi kamocha ne'edar bekodesh, nora tehilot osefele.
Shira Chadasha Shivchugu L'Shimcha Sfat Hayam Yachad Kulam Hodu V'Imlichu Ve'ameru
Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed.
Tzur Yisrael, Kuma Bezrat Yisrael, Ufdei Chinu Mecha, Yehuda v'Yisrael, Go Aleinu, Adonai Tzvot Shemo, Kedosh Yisrael, Baruch Atah Adonai, Gal Yisrael. Page 115b. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avoteinu v'Imotenu Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, v'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Ha'yibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, v'Konei Hakol, Ve'zocher Chasdei Avot v'Imahot, Ve'vigol Ibnei Bneihem, Leman Shemo v'Ahava, Melech Ozer Ufokeinu Moshiach U'Magen, Baruch Atah Adonai, Magen Avraham Ufoked Sarah, Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai, Mechayim Eitim Atarav Le'Oshia, Mashiv HaRuach U'Morid HaGashem, Mechalkel Chaim Bechesed, Mechayim Eitim Berachamim Rabim, Somech Noflim Verofech Olim, Umatir Asurim, Umekayem Emunato, Lishenei Afar, Michamocha Ba'al Givurot, Umido Melach, Melech Menit, Umechaye, Umatzmiach Yeshua, Bnei Manata Lachayot Meitim, Baruch Atah Adonai, Mechaye HaMeitim.
Mekadesh Hashem Olam, Kashem Shemati Shimoto Bishmei Morom, Kakotu Vayad Neviecho, Vekoroze Elze Viomar.
Mekadesh et Shimcha Ba'olam, Kashem Shemati Shimoto Bishmei Morom, Kakatu Vayad Neviecho, Elze Viomar.
Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzavot, Lo Kol Haaretz Kavodo. Oz Bekol, Raj Gadol, Adir V'Chazak, Mashmim Kol, Mit Nasim, Umotam Seraphim, Lumotam Baruch Yomeru.
Az bekol ra'ash gadol adir v'chazak mashmim kol. Az bekol ra'ash gadol adir v'chazak mashmim kol. Nitnasim le'umat serafim le'umatam baruch yomeru.
Baruch Kavod Adonai, Mimkomo. Really Olam Bo'ed Tishkon. Gadol v'tikadash b'tok Yerushalayim Yircha. L'dor b'dor netzach netzochim.
Kom chamakim atofia v'timloch enukim mechakim anachnu lach matai timloch b'tzion b'karov yameinu le'olam v'tishkon titkadal v'titkadash b'toch Yerushalayim Yircha l'dor v'dor netzach netzachim
Elohai Zion.
Dor vador nagid galecha unetzach tzachim kedushatcha nakdish v'shivchacha Elohim mipinoi mushlam ved ki amach gadol v'kadosh ata baruch ata Adonai ha'el hakadosh. Ose shalom bimromav, hu yase shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, Ya'aseh shalom, Ya'aseh shalom, Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, Ya'aseh shalom, Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, Ya'aseh shalom, Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ya'aseh shalom, Ya'aseh shalom, Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'meru. Amen. And just for a brief moment before we move on to the full Kaddish, I just want to highlight a small piece of the text from our Shabbat Amidah. One of the things that I'm going to be kind of challenging us to do before the end of services today is trying to put the Ten Commandments in any different possible context that we can. And something that's pretty noticeable is that the Ten Commandments is pretty, for all the importance we place on it, it's pretty glaringly missing from our liturgy, except for the one instance I can really directly think of is this opening paragraph of the silent part of the Shabbat Amidah. Moses rejoiced at the gift of his destiny when you declared him a faithful servant, adorning him with splendor as he stood in your presence atop Mount Sinai. 2 tablets of stone did he bring down, inscribed with Shabbat observance, and thus it is written in your Torah. And so just thinking a little bit about how the experience of Revelation, the experience of Sinai, the Ten Commandments kind of does or does not creep into our lives. And it certainly is there in the text of the Shabbat Amidah. And with that, we will continue with the full Kaddish. I'll give everyone the opportunity to unmute to participate responsibly in Yitkadal v'yikadash me Rabbah. Amad yibrach yirtei v'amlich machlutei v'chayachon v'machon v'chay v'chol Beit Yisrael v'agalav yizman kariv v'meru. Barach v'shabach v'far v'traman v'itnaseh v'tadar v'tlei v'tal shmei d'kudesha b'richu Elam mikol berchata v'shirata tishchata v'nechamata tamiran v'alma v'meru. Amen. Kabel tonadon d'chol Beit Yisrael kadam muham v'shmaya v'meru. Amen. Yehei shalom Rav bin Shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'meru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'al kol Yisrael tevel v'meru. And I will put us all back on mute, and I will ask Barry Pastor to unmute himself again, and we will hear another voice this morning as we turn to page 139 and open the ark for the beginning of the Torah service as soon as I put it up on the screen. Great. Barry, whenever you're ready.
Ein kamocho bailim Adonai v'ein kamasecho malchusecho malchus kol olamim umemshaltecho b'chol dor v'dor Adonai melech Adonai malach Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed Adonai oz li'amo yitain, Adonai yivorech esamo v'shalom, avorachamim, etiva betzon koetzion, tivnei chomos Yerushalayim, Ki v'chol levad b'tochnu melech el ram v'nisa Adon olamim. Vayehi ben so Aharon vayomer Moshe Kumo Adonai v'yafutzu oivecha Vianusu misanecha mipanecha. Ki mitzion teitze sora. Ki mitzion teitze sora. Udevar Adonai mirushalayim. Baruch shenasan Torah Torah. Baruch shenasan Torah Torah. Liamo Yisrael b'hikdusha so.
Thank you, Barry. Yasher Koach. You may be seated. Once again, Shabbat Shalom and good morning, everyone. And before I forget, Yasher Koach to everyone who's participated so far, but of course, a big Yasher Koach to Max, who is, I think mastering large chunks of the Siddur every day. And I have a feeling that by the time March 20th rolls around, he's going to be doing all this with his eyes closed. So Yasher Koach, Max, and thank you for lending your voice and your building expertise to our services this morning. It's always good to have you. So this morning, as I mentioned, we are reading Parshat Yitro. And in preparing for this morning's Parsha, I'm going to lift a phrase straight from the Eitz Chaim, because I loved it so much when I read it that I just couldn't resist. The Eitz Chaim, the Chumash we use every week, describes Parshat Yitro as the hinge of the Torah, which I loved kind of the imagery and the metaphor there. Of course, it doesn't make any sense in the context of either a physical scroll or two stone tablets, neither of which we can fold. Forget about thinking about them having hinges. But today really is. It's such an epic turning point in the story. We can think of that visually. We think of these really strong associations of the smoke, the trumpets, the ground shaking, all these kind of sensory experiences that mark this as a singular experience. And of course, there's the actual text and context. This is the covenantal moment between God and the entire people. This isn't, the covenant between God and Abraham, who, although he was promised a nation, was still an individual. This is really the covenant that stands through history and stands the test of time. And there really is no turning back. One of the things I was thinking about is for all the complaint narratives, right? For all the conflict between God and Moshe on one side and the people on the other side, there's several times where the people asked to turn back to Egypt, where they wish to go back in time physically. They never asked to go back to a time before receiving the Torah, before Sinai. They never asked to undo this relationship that gets made this morning, which I think is really telling to how important this is to the core of their national identity. They can try to push aside the Holy Land. They can try to pretend that they had it better in Egypt, but they never try to make it seem like they don't want this closeness with God that really develops this morning. And we'll talk a little bit more after the Torah reading about the 10 Commandments themselves. But I want to at least briefly touch on this morning's Parsha's namesake, who is Yitro, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law. And to continue with this idea of hinges, Yitro's presence certainly seems to be kind of a hinge for Moshe. Whenever Moses and Yitro come into each other's presence, tides really seem to turn. When Moshe first meets Yitro, that is really when he kind of is leaving behind his identity as an Egyptian. And that marks a huge transition in Moshe's life. And today, when he meets Yitro, it really marks a huge transition in Moshe's identity as a leader. It's Yitro and Yitro's really important advice to him that encourages Moshe to delegate, to ask for help, to realize that this task that he's taking on in leading the people isn't something that needs to lie squarely on his shoulders. And there's one verse that sticks out really notably this morning and kind of celebrating Yitro's role in the Torah and in the events and in his importance as a character. And that's chapter 18, verse 12. Vayikach Yitro hotein Moshe ola uzvachim la'Elohim vayavo Aaron v'chol ziknei Yisrael lechol lechem im hotein Moshe lifnei ha'Elohim. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices for God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to partake of the meal before God with Moses' father-in-law. And when you think about this, this is actually kind of the first celebratory moment after the people leave Egypt, right? Last week, we had the song, which is a celebration in its own sense, but that kind of went immediately into complaint. And we all know in Jewish history, Jewish culture, there's no celebration without food. And this kind of feast, this moment of sacrifice, this is really where we see the celebration coming to a head. And a custom that got brought to light this week through one of the many Jewish community listservs that I'm on is actually in Tunisian and Algerian and I think Moroccan Jewish communities. They have a tradition of holding a feast the Thursday before we read this Parsha called Seudat Yitro, literally called the Feast of Jethro, to commemorate this celebratory feast that took place with Yitro in this morning's Parsha. And also an acknowledgement of the really important role that Yitro plays in the early formation of Moses' leadership, and therefore, by extension, the really important role that he plays in the history of the Israelite people as they leave Egypt, which I thought was a really fascinating custom and just brought to my mind two really important parts. The first is just kind of the great diversity of practice and tradition within Jewish communities that are not, majority Ashkenazic European Jewish communities, and how many other ways there are out there to celebrate, many of which we probably have never even heard of. And also just, again, thinking of Yitro's role and thinking about him as an outsider and the importance of, getting that outsider's perspective, the importance of incorporating different voices, and really kind of remembering that some ideas might even seem obvious to us, right? Like, of course, right now we can say, oh yeah, of course Moshe should be delegating. Of course he should have 70 wise men to help him out. But at that point, no one on the inside had thought of it. And so making sure that we're really kind of keeping our ears open to the full spectrum of voices and help that might be offered to us, I think is a really important lesson as well. So that's the bit of Yitro the person that we'll focus on this morning. Obviously, we'll get to the 10 Commandments in just a little bit. I wanted to give a minute to open it up if anyone had any thoughts or comments before we do move on to this morning's Torah reading. Joel, go ahead, please.
I heard a drash this week about the name of this Parsha, Yitro, being different in that it's not the first word. So emphasizing even more the importance of Yitro.
Yeah, and I think that's also a pretty strong tradition in recognition of Jethro's really important role, right? It's not just, there is kind of added significance to the portion that includes the 10 Commandments being named after Yitro. That's something, in the Hebrew word that comes to mind is, there's two different Hebrew words. One is just schut or schus, like the honor, and the other is just like hakarat hatov, which kind of translates to English as just being like recognition of a good thing, but it's a more fun phrase in Hebrew in my mind. So thank you for pointing that out, Joel. Yeah, Judy.
Sorry, so I just happened to have a Hebrew English dictionary in front of me. And the word, the word yeter means the rest, the remainder, or surplus, or excess. So that's kind of an interesting, that's where his name comes from.
Yeah, that is interesting, and thinking about where that connection might lie, right? It's a good thought to ponder on. Yeah, Sharon, please.
So I just noticed this when Joel brought us back to the beginning, that it's not just that Yitro isn't the first word, but the first word is Vayishma. It's almost like an answer to Shema Yisrael, Vayishma Yitro, and Yitro did hear it.
Yeah, and also to think about like how good of a Parsha name Vayishma would be, like, right? And it was heard, connected to the Ten Commandments, and how foregoing that for the sake of calling the Parsha Yitro really does emphasize what Joel was saying, right? In that sense of like Hakarat HaTov, recognizing that legacy. It's also, it's worth noting for talking about kind of nationhood and tribal identity, and I don't have a great end point with this because it just kind of popped in my head. But we have at least 3 different portions that I can think of that are named after people. We have Yitro, we have Pinchas, and we have Balak, and only one of those.
Noach, also Noach.
What'd you say?
Noach.
Oh, right, and Noah, of course, Noah. Thank you. So still, Noach is kind of even pre-Israelite, so I'll put that one aside. But only one of those is someone who is actually, part of the tribe. So it's interesting to think on the larger topic of naming Parshiot and naming Parshiot after people, or naming things after people, what the larger implications are and the connections are. Great, so a lot to think about, and we haven't even gotten to the top of the mountain, so to speak. In just a moment, I will take us off mute, and we'll say the Lasok B'divrei Torah together. We have 2 wonderful Torah readers this morning. So we read the 10 Commandments 3 times a year. It happens now, it happens in Deuteronomy, and we read it on Shavuot. Of all the Torah reading I have done in my life, I think I've only read the 10 Commandments once, because there have always been wonderful people around me who have been doing it for much, much longer. And so, of course, Sharon has dibs in this community, but growing up, I have very distinct memories of Rebecca Jacobs reading the 10 Commandments as the sun came up on Shavuot morning after, kind of deliriously staying up and napping all night and coming in for services in the morning. But she was always fully with it and bringing all her power to the 10 Commandments. And she emailed me this week and said she'd love to do some laning. So she's going to start and read chapter 19, and then we'll hand it over to Sharon for chapter 20. And it's going to be a great, or not for chapter 20, for the middle of chapter 19 and into the 10 Commandments. So Rebecca, you're going to line them up, and Sharon, you're going to knock them down, so to speak. And for those of you who have an Eitz Chaim, we're going to start on chapter 19, verse 1, which is on page 436. Rebecca's going to read the first 19 verses, I think, straight through, and then we'll pause and hand things over to Sharon and check in, see if anyone has anything to say. But first, let's all unmute ourselves, or anyone who would like to can unmute themselves, and we will say,
Okay, what kind?
Torah. Baruch
Adonai,
Eloheinu
melech haolam,
asher
kidshanu,
Mitzivanu,
Lasok
b'divrei Torah.
Amen. And everyone's going to go back on mute. Rebecca, if you'll unmute yourself one more time, and I will put the text up on the screen.
בחודש השלישי בצאת בני ישראל מארץ מצרים, ביום הזה באו מדבר סיני, וייסעו מרפידים, ויבואו Bo umidbar Sinai vayachanu bamidbar vayichan sham Yisrael neged hahar uMoshe Allah el haElohim vayikra elav Adonai min hahar lemor ko tomar livet Yaakov v'tagid livnei Yisrael atem reitem asher asiti lemitzrayim va'esa etchem al kanfei nisharim Avi etchem elai ata im shamawa tishma'u b'koli ushmartem eti v'yitem li segula mikol ha'amim ki li kol ha'aretz atem tiyu li mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh ele ha'devarim asher tidaber el b'nei Yisrael vayavo Moshe vayikra leziknei ha'am Vayasem lifnehem et kol hadvarim ha'ele asher tzivahu Adonai vayanu kol ha'am yachtav vayomeru kol asher diber Adonai na'aseh vayashem Moshe et divrei ha'am el Adonai vayomer Adonai el Moshe Anochi ba'elecha Nan ha'avur Ishma ha'am b'dabri imach v'gam b'cha ya'aminu le'olam vayaged Moshe et divrei ha'am el Adonai vayomer Adonai el Moshe lech el ha'am v'kidashtam hayom u'machar v'chibsu simlotam v'hayu nechonim layom hashlishi Ki bayom hashlishi yered Adonai le'nei kol ha'am al har Sinai tikbalta et ha'am saviv le'mor yishamru lachem alot ba'har uvin goa b'katzehu kol hanogea b'har mot yumad tigabo yad Kisako yisakel o yaro yare im behema im ish lochye bimshoch hayovel hema yalu har vayered Moshe min har el ha'am vaykadesh et ha'am vaychabsu simlotam vayomer el ha'am heyu nechonim l'shloshet yamim al tigshu el isha vayi Yom Hashlishi Beyot Haboker Ayi Kolot Uvrakim Banan Kaved Har Bekol Shofar Chazak Ma'od Vayecharad Kol Ha'am Asher B'Machaneh Vayotze Moshe Et Ha'am Likrat HaElohim Min HaMachaneh Vayityatzvu B'Tachtit Ha'ar Har Sinai Ashan Kulo Mipnei Asher Yarad Alav Adonai Ba'esh Hayal Ashano Ke'eshem Hakivshan Vayecherad Kol Ha'ar Me'od Vayi Kol HaShofar Holech V'chazek Me'od Moshe Yidaber V'ha'Elohim Ya'anenu V'kol
Gosh, thank you so much, Rebecca. Way to get our Torah reading off to a beautiful start this morning. I just want to, give everyone a chance to pause and take a deep breath. We're going to hand things over to Sharon on chapter 19, verse 20. It is traditional to stand for the 10 Commandments. And everything that Rebecca just read is really this intense preparation, right? And this really drama building, like I think we really don't find anywhere else in the Tanakh. And I think the one way we do honor that really is to stand. Obviously, it's a little bit more powerful when it's all at the same time in the room and we can hear the creaking of chairs and all that. But I encourage you to try to build that up in your own space, however you can this morning. So we are on page 440 in the Eitz Chaim. And I'm going to ask Sharon to unmute herself, and we will read the 10 Commandments.
Rebecca, that was beautiful. We should do a duet sometime. Vayered Adonai al har Sinai el rosh hahar, vayikra Adonai leMoshe el rosh hahar, vaya'al Moshe, vayomer Adonai el Moshe, red ha'et ba'am, pen yehersu el rosh no. Vayered Adonai el rosh har Sinai el rosh har, vayikra Adonai leMoshe el rosh har, vaya'al Moshe, vayomer Adonai el Moshe, red ha'et ba'am, pen yehersu el Adonai lir'ot, v'nafal mimenu rav, v'gam hakohanim hanigashim el Adonai yitadashu, pen yifrotz bahem Adonai, vayomer Moshe el Adonai, lo yuchal ha'am la'alot el har Sinai, ki ata ha'edot habanu le'mor, hagbel et ha'har v'kidashto, vayomer elav Adonai lech red, ve'alita ata va'aharon imach, v'hakohanim v'ha'am, al yehersu le'olot el Adonai, pen yifratz bam, vayered Moshe el ha'am, vayomer aleihem, vayedaber Elohim et kol hadvarim ha'ele lemor, Anochi Adonai Elohecha, asher hotzeticha me'eretz Mitzrayim, מבית עבדים, לא יהיה לך אלוהים אחרים על פניי, לא תעשה לך פסל וכל תמונה אשר בשמיים ממעל, ואשר בארץ מתחת, ואשר במים מתחת לארץ, לא תשתחווה להם, ולא תעבדם, כי אנוכי אדוני אלוהיך אלקנה פוקד עוון אבות על בנים, על שילשים ועל ריבעים, לשונאי, ועושה חסד לאלפים, לאוהבי לשומרי מצוותי. לא תישא את שם אדוני אלוהיך לשווא, כי לא ינקה אדוני את אשר יישא את שמו לשווא. זכור את יום השבת לקדשו, 6 ימים תעבוד, ועשית כל מלאכתך, ביום השביעי שבת לאדוני אלוהיך, לא תעשה כל מלאכה, אתה ובנך וביתך, עבדך ואמתך, ובהמתך, וגרך אשר בשעריך, כי 6 ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, את הים ואת כל אשר בם, וינח ביום השביעי. על כן ברך אדוני את יום השבת, ויקדשהו. כבד את אביך ואת אמך, למען יאריכון ימיך, al ha'adama asher Adonai Elohecha noten lach. Lo tirtzach, lo tin'af, lo tignov, lo ta'anev re'acha, shaker, lo tachmod beit re'acha, lo tachmod eshet re'echa, ve'avdo ve'amato, v'shoro v'chamoro, v'chol asher l're'echa.
Yasher Koach, Sharon, beautifully done. And let's just take a moment we can sit back down, we can take a little stretch, we can take a deep breath as we envision kind of the ground stopping shaking, the smoke dissipating, the trumpets kind of fading out of the background, and we return to reality, or people return to reality, and we transition to a new reality and one under this covenant. Yeah, so we'll give a second to kind of make that transition back. Joel, did you have something you wanted to say? I see you're unmuted.
Yeah, 1910, 1914. Go to people and sanctify them. And then 14, he sanctified them. What's the sanctify? What is that?
That's a great question. I do not know off the top of my head. I mean, I imagine it's just kind of, I think where it falls out is that it's more Moses kind of asking them to sanctify themselves. This was, the preparation process was a 3-day, like, kind of don't do anything, keep extra watch on yourself. So I think that is really what the sanctification process is. And I guess at least the way I imagine it is, it starts with the warning and it ends with him kind of standing on the balcony and saying, all right, you guys have done this 3 days of prep. Now you're ready to go and we're ready to move on. But I have to open up some books and see if there's anything more specific about that. And I also see a comment from Joan. What struck me this time was the one about not bearing false witness against thy neighbor. Joan, I don't know if you want to say anything more about that, or just if you're, kind of generally reflecting on a time of what it means to hold truth in high regard, hopefully.
I'm reflecting mostly on people being accused of being pedophiles and eating people, and there are people who, some of them are Orthodox Jews who are in that camp, and I just can't see how they can be Orthodox Jews, follow the 10 Commandments, and bear false witness against their neighbors like that.
Yeah, and I certainly, when we think about kind of these 10 Commandments being especially elevated and having that call to truth being part of that, it really is a really stark and potent reminder, right, of just how important it is to keep truth as one of the kind of central pillars of our lives, and yeah, certainly trying to hold to make sure that truth wins out the day, and also that we do try to hold people accountable for things that are not founded in fact. Yeah, thanks Joan. And obviously, finding contemporary connections to all of these is what's a beautiful part of reflecting on 3,500 years of history since that day at the top of Sinai, and how much different what they had in mind with the declaration of not to bear false witness might be than what it means to bear false witness on social media or 24-hour news cycle or any of that. So certainly taking these laws through the ages. All right, let's turn back to Sharon for the last little piece of this morning's Torah reading, which is on page, we flipped a lot of pages because the layout for the 10 Commandments is a little bit weird. We are on page 449, chapter 20, verse 15.
וכל העם רואים את הקולות ואת הלפידים ואת קול השופר ואת הרעשן וירא העם וינועו ויעמדו מרחוק ויאמרו אל משה דבר אתה עמנו ונשמע ואל ידבר עמנו אלוהים פן נמות. ויאמר משה אל העם אל תיראו כי לבעבור נשאות אתכם באלוהים ובעבור תהיה יראתו על פניכם לבלתי תחטאו. ויעמוד העם מרחוק ומשה ניגש אל הערפל אשר שם האלוהים. ויאמר אדוני אל משה כה תאמר אל בני ישראל אתם ראיתם כי מן השמיים דיברתי עמכם לא תעשון איתי אלוהי כסף אלוהי זהב לא תעשו לכם מזבח אדמה תעשו לי וזבחת עליו את אלוקיך ואת שלומך ואת צאנך ואת בקריך בכל המקום אשר אזכיר את שמי אבוא אליך וברכתיך ואם מזבח אבנים תעשה לי לא תבנה את הן גזית כי חרבך הנפת עליה ותאכל עליה ולא תעלה במעלות על מזבחי אשר לא תגלה ערוותך עליו.
Awesome. Yasher Koach. Thank you, Sharon. You don't even need to bother remuting yourself because in just a moment we'll continue with the healing service. Well, it looks like, Joel, did you have one more comment or question before we move on?
Yeah, the last line, 23, do not climb up my altar with steps, which Rashi says do a ramp, not steps, so that your nakedness will not be revealed. What does one thing have to do with the other?
So it's almost a little, I mean, it's definitely not meant as comic relief. When Sharon was just reading it, I was almost thinking of it a little bit as comic relief at the end of this intensity of these passages. Basically, this is at a time before they've talked about centralized worship or the tabernacle or the Mishkan or the temple, and they're talking about basically kind of backyard altars, so to speak. And so on the like official altars that only the priests are approaching, the Kohanim, the priests, have a really dedicated dress code, including like multiple layers of clothes. But this is talking to kind of your average Joe who might have just been wearing some sort of a tunic and might not have been wearing anything under that tunic. And so there's this idea of immodesty that if there are steps and you're wearing a tunic without anything else underneath, there might be some level of exposure that would not be completely appropriate to the occasion of approaching an altar and giving an offering to God. So it does, it strikes me as a little bit of kind of comic relief. I think it was probably a little bit more real for them in terms of like just not wanting to see it happen. Especially, I imagine, compared to different cultic practices that took place in other places where I imagine that there were different interpretations of how the human body or a naked body might have approached a holy being or a deity. But that's kind of the background that I know about that. Does that address it more or less?
Yeah.
Great.
So can I just say that
Oh, she's muted.
Oh, Rebecca, you muted yourself in the middle of that.
all right, here, now we're good. So I checked out, like Joel, I think, asked the question before about what does it mean in chapter 19, verse 10, where God says to Moses, go to the people and make them holy. And like, what is that exactly? And then it goes on with instructions what the people should do. Wash and refrain from sexual relations, and there's do your laundry. And so I think your question was, so what does it mean when God said to Moses, make them holy? Is that a separate thing, a separate ritual? And it's interesting because like Rashi, Ramban, like everybody turns it back to, it's not a separate thing. It's not like Moses had some kind of separate authority or separate ritual that would work. Make them holy by how? By telling them how to make themselves holy, which I think is kind of a nice democratizing thing, you know? It's not like Moses had magic rights at his personal, that he personally owned. It's like, what you do yourself is what makes you holy. So that seems to be, in my little 3-minute look at the medieval commentators, seems to be what's going on here, which is kind of nice.
Thanks, Rebecca. And yeah, I think that definitely, first of all, I think that matches up really well with kind of Jewish tradition in terms of like, we don't have intermediaries between us and our holiness. It's not Moshe performing, some magic ritual where the people are declared holy all of a sudden. It really is that personal building process. So thank you for bringing that in. And also, the only thing better than a smartphone is a bunch of people sitting at home with their libraries and being able to kind of look things up in real time. Another wonderful little kind of silver lining to the home prayer. We've already had the Hebrew dictionary and the medieval commentaries brought in this morning. So thank you all for pulling your resources together. It's really, really wonderful. Yeah, Sharon.
So thank you for that, Rebecca. But the one thing I always feel like I need to add here, because this is one of the most troubling pieces to me, always, every year, is when God says, tell them to make themselves holy, and Moses puts his own thing on it and says, stay away from a woman for 3 days.
It's like the worst pasuk in the Torah.
That's the fallacy of going through an intermediary, because you get his perspective, which isn't necessarily what the deity meant. I like to think of it that way anyhow.
Yeah, and I think you can also assume that the people will do what the people will have done. And so, it's not this process of, again, it's not a magic process of anyone who didn't fully keep to it or who interpreted it their own way was kicked out of the camp. There's kind of the intermediary doesn't always, even if the message gets changed a little, it doesn't necessarily get enforced. But yeah, definitely some kind of, yeah, some tensions with that verse. All right, yeah, Mike, and then we'll move into the healing service.
So this is a very mundane observation or question. So we do the triennial cycle, but it seems to me that no matter which part of the cycle we're in, we always read the 10 Commandments on the Shabbat of Yitro and the other Shabbat when in Deuteronomy when it occurs. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a certain number. So of course the triennial cycle is breaking the Torah portions up into reading the entire thing over a 3-year period instead of in a 1-year period. There are a number of portions that the cycle gets adjusted so that we read them every year. Most notably, probably, are the 2 different readings of the 10 Commandments, the Song of the Sea, which we read last week, and even when we get to Deuteronomy, and some of the Parshiot are very short, we often read the entire Parsha every year. It kind of works on the general principle, and this is true in most of Jewish thought. You can add, but you can't take away. So you can read more than just the entire text once through over those 3 years. You can't shorten it so that you're skipping anything within that 3-year period. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, and the Shema also, I think, is included in that. I'm sure there are some other things too, but I'm not, off the top of my head, I don't know what they are. Yeah, Joel.
When did the triennial cycle get developed?
So a bigger question for another day. The most general answer is that I believe the triennial cycle is actually older than the annual cycle. It used to be that they would only, it's an ancient Israel-based custom, I think, of, getting the people together every Shabbat, and I'm pretty sure they went through a 3-year cycle before it was a 1-year cycle. I need to actually look up the dates and the history on that, unless someone else knows more about it than I do, which is entirely possible. But that's my understanding. Nowhere in the, it's certainly not written in the Torah that you should read a portion of the Torah every Shabbat. That is a kind of human instituted practice. And so, yeah, I'm fairly certain that the triennial is actually based off of kind of an older custom of breaking it up into a 3-year cycle. Okay, now Sharon, after much ado, we are throwing it back to you for the healing service, and we'll all just take a deep breath and transition from the intensity of this morning's Torah portion into our healing service.
Okay, and please join in for the introductory song. Mishe berach Avotenu Mikor habracha Limotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mishe berach imotenu Mikor habracha la'avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. Misha berach avotenu v'imotenu, Avraham, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov, Moshe v'Aharon, David u'Shlomo, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, v'Leah, Bilha, v'Zilpa, v'Yivarech v'Yirafeh ha'cholim, b'nei Avraham v'Sarah, b'nei Adam v'Chava. May God, who blessed our ancestors, bless and heal all those in need of it now. Shoshana bat Pinchas v'Chana, Nancy Peace, Louisa McCleary, Eliyahu Betzalel ben Pinchas v'Chana, Meir ben Fega v'Aaron Yitzchak, Dennis McNeely, Jess Kramer, Alexis Watson, May Daw, Bob Jelly, Bruce Mallory, Alan Mann, Barbara Dowd, Yaakov Chaim ben Herschel Yitzchak v'Batya, John O'Brien, Jacques Monse, Carol Barker, Catherine Doloff, Ken Bosi, Chana bat Rivka, Lorraine Daniluk, Denise Stelmack, Dennis Montini, Yitzchak ben Yisrael, Madeline Blake, Rachel Barcelona, Corey Brown, Kara Smoley, Adam Stander, Fotios Rallis, Chana Esther bat Ayala Hadar, Batya bat Neshama v'Meir, Zohar Vered. And we know there are many, many names that we don't know about, people who need healing near and far known to us and not. But anyone here who has the name of someone you would like to specifically include, if you would let us know that now, we'll go around and take those names too.
Yeah, Mike, if you want to unmute yourself.
Avraham ben Miriam, Dina Bracha bat Miriam, Anna Schenker. Also on Adam Stander, he's still in rehab. He's having a tough time. I'm not sure when he'll be discharged. He's at the Brigham facility on High Street.
Bob Mandel, got on mute.
Salima Jones Staley, Kurt Curtis, George Selfridge, Carol Freeband, Ruth Hirsch.
Thanks, Bob. Marty, if you want to unmute yourself.
Aaron Stroop.
Thanks. Joel?
Well, I'd just like to share that somebody we had on the Mishnah Barak list, Joel Gordon, has died. He was the husband of Rabbi Melissa Wenig, who was our rabbi after Sadinsky and before Avi, if I have my chronology right. A really wonderful man. And I'm wondering, what's the male term for Rebbitzin?
Don't know, but a good question. Yeah.
Well, he did a very good job in that role.
First gentleman.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Thanks, Joel. Barry, please.
Bela Adela Bas Barrel for Fred Gamero.
Judy?
Devorah Sosana Bat Matilda.
Angie, did I see your hand?
Meshulam Ben Hava, Francis Yadlin, Aviva Barzel.
Thank you. Anyone else whose hand I missed that wanted to include a name? And we'll just take one more minute. Obviously, there's so many more people in need of healing, in need of physical healing, in need of spiritual healing, and whether we know their names or not, we can still definitely include them in our prayers. So let's just take a couple more moments of silent prayer before Sharon continues. Sharon, whenever you're ready.
בעבור שאנחנו מתפללים בעבורם, ישחזר הקדוש ברוך הוא ימלא רחמים עליהם, להחלימם ולרפאותם, ולהחזיקם ולהחיותם, וישלח להם מהרה רפואה שלמה, רפואת הנפש ורפואת הגוף, שבתים לזעוק ורפואה קרובה לבוא, השתה בעגלה ובזמן קריב, ונאמר אמן.
Thank you, Sharon. And now you can finally sit back and take a deep breath, and we will pass it off to our last guest participant of the day, Judy Matthews, who will be reading this morning's Haftarah. This is from Isaiah chapter 6, a very different revelatory, miraculous experience. This is Isaiah's famous vision, or one of Isaiah's famous vision of angels with 6 wings. And yeah, it's kind of another crazy story, and definitely, you know, interesting to compare and contrast some of the language that pops up in both, in terms of there being, you know, again, a renewed emphasis on holiness, and smoke and sound and shaking. So reading about a different prophetic experience of that. And Mom, whenever you're ready, I'll put it up on the screen.
Thanks.
And it's on page 452 if you have the Eitz Chaim. We're reading the shorter Sephardic version.
Just one quick comment before I begin, and that is just going over and practicing this Haftarah really connected me with this real strong sense of intimacy that existed between Isaiah and God, and just kind of had a strong influence on me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Asher Bahar Binviim Tovim V'ratza v'divreihem hanemarim be'emet Baruch atah Adonai Habocher b'Torah v'Moshe avdo U'v'Yisrael amo U'v'nvi'ei ha'emet b'tzedek Bishnat mot hamelech Uziyahu va'eret Adonai Yoshev al kisei ram v'nisa v'shulav mileim etaycha Sirafim omdim mimalo shesh kinafayim le'echad B'shtayim yichaseh fanav, u'b'shtayim yichaseh raglav, u'b'shtayim ye'ofev. V'kara zel ze v'yamar, kadosh, 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 Adonai tzivot, melech kol haaretz kivodo. Vayanu amot hasipim mikol hakore v'habayit yimalei ashan v'omar oili ki nitmeti ki ishtmei sfatayim anochi uv'toch amtmei sfatayim anochi yoshev Ki et hamelech Adonai tzvaot ra'u einai vayaf elai echad min hasrafim uviyado ritzpa v'amel kachayim lakach me'al hamizbeach vayagal pi vayomer Hine nagazeh al sfatecha b'sar avonech v'chatatecha techupar v'ashma et kol Adonai omer et mi eshlach umi elech lanu va'omar hineni shlacheni v'yomer lech v'amarta la'am hazeh Shimu shamoa v'al tavinu re'u ra'o v'al teda'u hashmein lev ha'am hazeh v'oznav hachbei beinav hasha pen yireh beinav v'oznav yishma Ulvavo yavin bashav v'rafalo va'omar ad matai Adonai va'yomer ad asher imsha'u arim mein yoshev uvatim mein adam v'ha'adama tisha'esh mama Merichak Adonai et ha'adam, v'rabah ha'azuva b'kerev ha'aretz, v'od ba asiriya, v'shava v'haita levaer, ka'ela v'cha'alon, asher b'shalechet matzevet bam, zera kodesh matzavta. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, tzur kol halamim, tzadik b'chol hadarot, ha'el haneman, homer oseh, medaber mekayem, v'kol dvarav emet v'tzedek, ne'eman atahu Adonai Eloheinu v'ne'emanim livarecha, v'davar echad midvarecha, achor lo yashuv reikam, Hil melech ne'eman, v'rachaman atah, Baruch atah Adonai, Hayel haneman b'chol dvarav.
Amen.
Rachem al Tzion ki beit chayenu, v'la'alu v'nefesh toshia b'mehera b'yameinu. Baruch atah Adonai.
Yitro.
Nesameach Tzion bevaneha.
Amen.
Samcheinu, Adonai Eloheinu, b'le'ana v'bavdecha, v'malchut Beit David Meshichecha, b'mhera yavo v'yagel libeinu, al kiso lo yeshiv zar, v'lo yinchalu od acherim et kvodo, ki v'shem kodshecha nishbata lo, shelo yichbeni ro le'olam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai,
Shmo.
Magen David.
Amen.
Al HaTorah, ועל עבודה, ועל נביאים, ועל יום השבת הזה, שנתת לנו, אדוני אלוהינו, לקדושה ולמנוחה, לכבוד ולתפארת. על הכל, אדוני אלוהינו, אנחנו מודים לך, ומברכים אותך, יתברך שמך בפי כל חי, תמיד לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה, אדוני, מקדש השבת.
Amen. Yasher Koach, Mom. Thank you so much. And of course, to kind of bring us full circle on where we started the Torah service, we talk about what makes it into the liturgy. I mean, hopefully everyone kind of noticed that line of Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot. And so this kind of one line from Isaiah, I mean, it's not just one line. Obviously, it's become really central to us, and that makes it into a really central part of our daily prayers, morning and afternoon, if not evening. So thinking again a little bit about what makes the cut and what doesn't, which is where I'm actually going to more or less start my Dvar Torah this morning. With a Mishnah that puts the recitation of the Ten Commandments in a very different context. The Mishnah, of course, was compiled around 200 CE, and it was, the thoughts were generated in the centuries preceding that. So this is talking about practice approximately 2,000 years ago, in the time of the Second Temple at least. And it records that part of the daily prayer liturgy that was said every day in the temple was a recitation of the text of the Ten Commandments every morning, basically in the part of the service leading up to the Shema. And back at that time in the centralized temple liturgy, the Ten Commandments were said every morning as a pretty central part of their prayer service, in addition to their sacrificial service. And then this isn't recounted in the Mishnah, but basically it was removed by rabbinic authorities who were worried that too many people thought that only the Ten Commandments came from Sinai and not the whole Torah. And so they actually wanted to de-emphasize the Ten Commandments a little bit, certainly as part of the daily liturgy, but also as part of kind of the focus of our belief system and experience of revelation. And that's something I did not know before. I certainly don't read or recite the Ten Commandments every day. But obviously it's very present in my consciousness, and it's very present in our collective consciousness. Obviously, if you walk or drive by our synagogue, they are about a story tall right outside our front door. And walking in the room today, of course, as I pointed to earlier, we have the set on top of the ark. And then when I opened the ark, I remembered that even on our Torah cover, we have the little set right here. And you can open this up. I don't think there's a mini set on the Torah inside, but obviously this is something that we include very deeply into our ritual lives and our ritual identities. And part of that goes back to the experiential side of Sinai. Of course, there's the very famous midrash that every Jew who ever lived or ever will live was there at Sinai that day during those events that we read this morning. Everyone was there to hear them. And so these words, that experience of revelation, and these words that are the kind of tangible representation of revelation, are really deeply inculcated into our collective Jewish mindset and identity. And in some ways, I almost feel like the actual words of the commandments, because I don't visit them every day, they're kind of like an old friend, someone who perhaps you don't talk to nearly as much as you feel you should. But the minute you pick up the phone and call them, you realize the connection is just as strong as ever. And you can pick up exactly where you left off without missing a beat. And hearing Sharon read the 10 Commandments this morning, that's generally the way I feel. And it's the way I feel 3 times a year, as I mentioned, whenever we read the 10 Commandments. And that goes along really strongly with the dramatic buildup, right? Picturing the smoke, hearing the sounds, seeing the sounds, all these crazy sensory experiences. And in our more tangible, right now experience, just standing up in preparation, right? Standing all together. And again, hearing the familiar voice of Sharon and her singing and recitation of the 10 Commandments. It really does build that association and make us feel like we're picking up exactly where we left off. And in that regard, I like to think of the 10 Commandments and the whole experience of revelation at Sinai more as something that happened for us as a people, not something that happened to us. Perhaps my least favorite midrash, and this one again is so famous to the point that I think many people think it is included in the text, is that at Sinai, there's a midrash that God actually lifted up the mountain and held it over the people's heads until they kind of consented to accept God's covenant. And there, along with that, is this idea that the covenant needed to be driven, or agreement to the covenant needed to be driven by a sense of fear and obligation, and not a sense of love and connection. Which is why I can do without that very famous midrash, and I want everyone to know very clearly that that is not anywhere in the actual text of the Torah. Instead, I prefer a modern, and if not midrashic, then maybe psychological take on the events at Sinai, which is put forth by the great modern Bible scholar, Dr. Aviva Gottlieb Zornberg. She writes that the purpose of revelation is to develop human qualities. What is enacted at Sinai is the revelation of the human being in larger range and strength. A new consciousness is born in this revelation. The Israelites endure an initiation that ensures them against the extremities of history. God comes to Sinai so that the human may come fully into its own. And I think that's where the power of the Sinai experience truly lies, in the covenantal bond formed on that day. This bond elevates the people while also binding God firmly to us. Nahum Sarna emphasizes that this is a living reality, an actual legal circumstance. Covenant consciousness suffuses all subsequent developments. And maybe that's what it means that we were there at Sinai on that day, that we've never wanted to or been able to move away from that covenantal consciousness is so suffused into our identity as the Jewish people that it is inseparable from that identity. Which I think ties nicely in to the short coda at the end of the Parsha. Not the part about not approaching an altar in nakedness, that's the coda of the coda, but in the verses before, make for me an altar of earth in every place where my name will be mentioned. Revelation was never supposed to be a one-time event, and it was never supposed to be the end-all be-all. Rather, we were supposed to take the word and the experience and live it. Truly bring the covenant into the lived reality and bring it into the space spaces and times of our everyday, not just leave it behind at Sinai. And to go back to the idea of 3 days of preparation, on Thursday morning at our Minyan, I challenged the small group who was there to think about the ways in which the 10 commandments, seep into your life and the way in which you relate to them. And this morning is the third day from that Minyan, which is appropriate, given the context of 3 days of waiting for revelation. And so I know not all of you were there. Some of you are hearing that question for the first time, but if people have any thoughts about kind of how they personally relate to this experience, or whether, anything I just shared speaks to you or not, I'd love to open it up for a few minutes of conversation. And I think I saw Joel eagerly champing at the bit there, and go for it, Joel.
Well, the midrash you mentioned of us all being at Sinai and experiencing the revelation, my understanding is it also says that each of us had a unique revelatory experience. And every day in my prayers, when I reflect on this, I get the shivers. It's just so powerful to think about how I was given an experience of spirit in our lives and God and what that could possibly be.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for bringing that in, right? And it's not necessarily a unique perspective to this experience, right? It's also very strongly associated with last week's Parshat too, seeing each of ourselves as if we had left Egypt and crossed out of the sea. And so using these kind of universal experiences to really build that closeness and build that personal experience within the universal, there's an amazing amount of potential there. So thank you. Anyone else have any thoughts they like to share? You can also obviously feel free to marinate on it throughout the week. Yeah, Bruce, please unmute yourself.
I'm having trouble finding it, but it was a sentence that the instructions around the Mount Sinai was to build a perimeter around it. And I once heard someone describe the Talmud as just that.
Yeah, there's certainly, that is maybe not I'm not as familiar with it in the context of the Talmud, but a lot of Jewish law has to do with this idea of building fences and building perimeters, right? Like wanting to keep one step away from the possibility of sin and not being right on the cusp of sin or transgression. And so, yeah, there is that really fascinating kind of conflict in all this that we're talking about, right? We talk about revelation as this really intense experience, but there does seem to be a little bit of a gap between the physical and the spiritual, because the spiritual experience was really what I think was the high point. But in terms of the physical experience, it was only Moshe who was actually up on top of the mountain, and everyone else was warned to keep their physical distance, lest some tragedy befall them. So there is that interesting kind of dichotomy there a little bit. Thanks, Bruce. Any last thoughts before we wrap up the Torah service? Great. Oh, Joel, one more thing.
Just read in Kaplan's Humash that Moses going up the mountain was in meditation, not so much physically standing on the mountaintop.
I like that. That kind of matches the man on the mountaintop persona a little bit more, right? Thank you, Joel. All right. Thank you all for your thoughts and a lot of good conversation about this morning's Torah reading. Before we go ahead and close the ark, it is Shabbat Mevarchim. It is the week before Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh will be Rosh Chodesh Adar, the month of Purim, begins next Shabbos. So before we go to the conclusion of services, I am going to take out the Torah and put the blessing for the new month up on the screen so that we can send some good hopes and prayers and good energy into the new month that will be starting next Shabbat. So I'll put it up on the screen. Take out the Torah. It is customary to rise since the Torah is out. And yeah. Yehi ratzon milfanecha, Adonai Eloheinu v'alei avoteinu, shetechadesh aleinu et hachodesh hazeh letova v'livracha, v'titen lanu chayim arukim, chayim shel shalom, chayim shel tova, chayim shel bracha, chayim shel parnasa, chayim shel chilutz atzamot, chayim sheyesh bahem yirat shamayim v'yirat chet, chayim she'en bahem busha uflima, chayim shel osher v'chavod, chayim sheteh banu avat Torah v'yirat shamayim, chayim she'imalu mishalot libeinu l'tova. Amen. Selah. May it be your will, Adonai our God and God of our ancestors, to reawaken in us joy and blessing in the month ahead. Grant us a long life, a peaceful life with goodness and blessing, sustenance and physical vitality, a life of reverence and piety, a life free from shame and reproach, a life of abundance and honor, a reverent life guided by the love of Torah, a life in which our worthy aspirations will be fulfilled. Amen. And Rosh Chodesh Adar will be this coming Friday and Shabbat. Mishe asa nisim lavotenu v'gal otam me'avdut l'charut v'yigal otanu v'karov v'kabetz ne'achenu v'erbachim b'ot haaretz chaverim kol Yisrael v'nomar Amen. Rosh Chodesh Adar yeh b'yom Shishi u'b'yom Shabbat Kodesh haba aleinu v'al kol Yisrael L'tova. The new month of Adar will begin on Friday and Shabbat. May it hold blessing for us and for all the people of Israel and for all the people of the world. Yechad she'elu HaKadosh Baruch Hu aleinu ve'al kol amo beit Yisrael. Yechad she'elu HaKadosh Baruch Hu aleinu ve'al kol amo beit Yisrael. Lechaim ul shalom lesasonu lesimcha leyeshua ul nechama v'nomar amen. May the Holy One bless this new month for us and for all the people of the house of Israel with life and peace, joy and gladness, deliverance and consolation, health and happiness, and all the other blessings we are wishing for ourselves and our friends and our family and the whole world. And let us say, Amen. And of course, with the beginning of Adar, we're all looking forward. The tune, in case it wasn't quite clear enough, was Misha Nichnas Adar Marbin B'Simcha. Adar, the month of Purim, is traditionally a month where we're trying to bring as much joy as possible into our lives. And so may that truly come to be. And let's move towards the end of services with the full Kaddish. I'm not going to put it up on the screen, but I will ask people to unmute to respond to the Kaddish. Yitgalal yitgadash me'rabah.
Amen.
She'almad yvrach yirtei v'emlich malchutei v'chaychon v'yachon v'chay d'chol beit Yisrael b'agala v'zman kariv v'meru. Amen.
Eish me'rabah mevorach. She'olam lo me'omayah.
Barach v'shabach v'dvar v'truah minaseh v'tadar v'tolei v'tosh me'dekudesha brichu. Eila mikol berchata v'shiratat shfata v'nechmata damiran be'alma v'meru. Amen. Yitkabel tzonotahon d'chol beit Yisrael kadam lohon v'shmaya v'meru. Amen. Yehi shlocha v'shmaya v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'meru. Amen. Oseh shalom nimromav hu yaseh shalom. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshrei teva v'imeru.
Amen.
Put us back on mute, and we will continue with the Aleinu. If you would like, please rise. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, atei kedula v'yotzer reshith, shelo asanu kegoyei haratzot, velo samanu kemishpachot hadama, shelo sam chelkeinu kahem, v'gor aleinu kechol hamonam, anachnu korim, umishtachavim, umodim, Lifnei Melech Malchei Hamlachim Hakadosh Baruch Hu Shehu Noteh Shamayim Yosed Haaretz Umoshev Yikaro Bashamayim Imal Shechinatu Zo V'Gavhei Meromim Hu Eloheinu Ein Od Emet Malkeinu Efes Ulato Kakatu B'Torato V'Elatayom V'Hashivota Elevavecha Ki Adonai Hu Elohim Bashamayim Imal V'Al Haaretz Mitachat Einod Kakatu b'toratecha, Adonai loch le'olam va'ed. V'ne'emar v'haya Adonai v'melech al kol haaretz. V'yom hahu, yeh Adonai echad. Ushemo echad. And on page 184, in just a moment, we'll conclude with the Mourner's Kaddish. I'll invite folks to unmute themselves to join in for the Kaddish. This week, Congregation Havas Achim marks the Yortzeitin of Samuel Fram and Francis Yanako. May their memories be a blessing. Please join me in the Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Ve'alma yibrach v'yutei ve'amlich malchutei ve'chayechon u'vyomechon u'chayei l'chol Beit Yisrael ba'agala u'vizman kariv v'imru Amen.
Oseh shalom b'mamav. Yehei shmei Rabba mevarach le'olam amei omaya.
V'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh V'yitazar, v'yitalei, v'yitalal, shemei d'kudesha, brichu, ve'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechemata, tamiran be'alma v'imru, Amen. Hey, Shalom Rabba, min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, Amen. Oseh shalom miromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, Amen. Shabbat shalom, everyone, and good morning. Thank you once again to Sharon Whitner and Rebecca Jacobs and Judy Matthews and Max Kirstein and Barry and Mike and Jenny for all sharing your voices this morning and taking on some of our liturgy and laning. Really wonderful to have you all with us and to have you all participating. Lots of stuff going on the next couple weeks. Biggest kind of out of the ordinary event is the coffee house on Valentine's Eve, a week from tomorrow. Sign up is through the CAA website. An email went out on Thursday and it'll be in the e-blast. So if you want to perform, that would be great. Open mics is a great opportunity to work out some public speaking or public performance jitters, or if you just want to come and listen and watch, that would be great too. So that's next Sunday, the 14th in the evening. Other things to note is just Purim is at the end of the month, and we're actually on somewhat short notice going to have a pretty good slate of Purim programming going on, including my mom and Fran teaming up for a Hamantashen baking demo in class. And we're also going to do a joint Megillah reading with Temple Emmanuel in Haverhill, which should be really nice. So keep Purim on your calendars towards the end of the month. That will also be in the e-blast this week. And the other long-term announcement I want to make is that Lapin Foundation is doing their collective North Shore Intro to Judaism class. It's traditionally a class geared towards people interested in conversion. It's also a really great class for anyone who's part of an interfaith family, where even if conversion isn't something on the table at the moment, you want to give a fuller background of Jewish history, tradition, and knowledge. And the reason I really want to emphasize this class happening this year is that it is happening online. And it's a collaboration between, I don't remember exactly how many North Shore shuls, but when it happens in person, it involves a lot of driving to Marblehead and Beverly and Gloucester and Peabody. And so the opportunity to do it online is actually a really wonderful opportunity for anyone. For most of the people on this Zoom are not necessarily the target audience, but I assume you know people who are. So that information will also be in the e-blast, and feel free to spread that and to send anyone who you think might be interested my way. Any other announcements, things you want the community to know? Yeah, Mike.
I just was going to say, I noted that email from that, and Alex is one of the instructors for it, so I'm very proud that he's doing it, and I want to recognize that.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I'm leading 3 sessions, and honestly, I pushed a little bit to do an online version to really, again, take advantage of the silver linings of COVID and the fact that no one from Newburyport wants to drive to Peabody or Marblehead once a week. So the slight downside is that the class is on Tuesday nights, so I'll have to talk with our adult ed people about maybe a small shift in schedule, but we'll worry about that after Shabbos. We'll keep our own adult ed going too. Any other announcements? Yeah, Barry.
Tomorrow is Worldwide Rap, which is a program sponsored by the Federation of Jewish Men's Club. And there's going to be a program online. I believe it's 9 or 9:30. It should have been in the blast.
It was in last week's e-blast. Thank you for the reminder on that, Barry. We're not doing a CAA event, but we are joining in the larger regional men's club event. And the other event of note, thank you for reminding me, Barry, of reminding me that there are things that go on beyond just like CAA institution. Today is the film premiere of Terezin, which is Anna Smulowitz's play that got made into a movie. I believe Olivia Colden is in the film. There is a 2 o'clock and a 7 o'clock. And so the 7 o'clock is definitely, okay by our Shabbat standards. I'm sure if you Google Terezin film premiere, I think it's like a $25 ticket to watch it at home. But if you Google Terezin film premiere or look in the e-blast, you can get all the details for that. Great. I don't see any more hands. So if anyone would like to rise for Hatikva, let's do that and then say Kiddush and then go enjoy some sunshine. Kol balevav penima nefesh Yehudi homia ulefate mizrach kadima ayin letzion Sophia Olo avda tikvatenu Ha'atikva bashnot apayim Liyotam chofshi ve'artzenu Eretz Zion Yerushalayim Liyotam chofshi ve'artzenu Eretz Zion Yerushalayim Veshamru b'nei Yisrael et HaShabbat La'asot et HaShabbat Ledorotam Be'Olam Veshamru b'nei Yisrael et HaShabbat La'asot et HaShabbat Ledorotam Be'Olam Beini uvein b'nei Yisrael oti le'olam Veshamru b'nei Yisrael את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. כי 6 ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. על כן ברוך הנגדו ושבת יגשהו סברי.
לחיים.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם בורא פרי הגפן.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם שהכל יהיה בדברו.
Amen.
Amen.
Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom.
shalom.
Lovely being with you.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Everybody.
Good job.
Good job.
Shabbos, good week.
Yes.
Good week.
Shabbos.
Good week.
Shabbos.
Koach, Rebecca.
Good month.
and
Oh, yeah.
Sharon.
It's nice to hear your voice. And it's a great
Yeah.
haftarah too.
Oh, it's very powerful. I never realized how powerful.
That's really a wonderful haftarah, actually.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sharon and Leah, maybe by next year you guys can be fighting my mom for it.
That is the plan.
We need to connect on that now that I've done the laning. I want
Great.
to
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, we hope to be taking more turns by next year.
And maybe we'll be live and we can do duets and not be crazy over it.
Oh.
Hey, yes, taking turns within a passage, not just week to week.
And Sharon, I think I saw Marissa pop on, or at least her name pop on, pretty much at like the moment you got to Kavedet Avicha Vetinecha, which was
That's pretty interesting. It was her bat mitzvah that, that started the whole thing, because she did her bat mitzvah on Shavuos and learned the Aseret Hadibrot, and I learned it with her. And she came back several years and did it, but now I'm lucky if she tunes in to hear me do part of it. Necha is a good time to come on.
Good.
Good
Shabbat
Shabbos,
shalom.
everybody.
Shabbat shalom.
Anyway,
Shabbat shalom.
I'm great
time to
to
go
see
back
you.
to life.
Yeah,
Bye.
Leslie, very, very good.
Thank you very much.
Thanks again, Rebecca. It was great to see you.
Thank
Good job, Anna. Good job, Bob.
Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.